Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Molina, and today I'm going to be presenting a presentation called Making Sense of an Awakening World. Today, we've heard from a lot of great speakers who have walked us through everywhere from the inner world to, on a cosmic level, what is happening in terms of the evolution of the human species. But once everybody tunes out of this presentation and goes back to their regular life, we're still faced with all of the various struggles and challenges of a world that's in the process of awakening. So today I wanted to help make sense of some of these things that we see in the world today. I'm going to bring in an older historical perspective, as well as a new modern scientific perspective and a spiritual perspective in between. So the picture I have up on my screen is a rock carving, and in front of it is standing a Hopi elder. The Hopi are a tribe in the Southwest United States who have a very interesting tradition. They're very closely related to the Zuni tribe as well. Um, in their creation story is depicted a sequence of events that describes the evolution of the human race from the beginning of their civilization onto um, events that will unfold here, according to the Hopi, in the near future. So I'm going to move to the next slide and show a little bit better uh, depiction of this diagram and just walk you through it. So on the lower left, this is Masal. This is the creator. And in his hand, you can see a bow with some arrows on the ground. Masal, upon creating the Hopi tribe, gave his original instructions, which were to lay down their weapons, that they should live humbly and simply and in a peaceful way close to the earth. He created the path of evolution. And at a certain point, the Hopi were instructed that when they saw the symbol of a cross being carried by pale-skinned arriver, travelers or pioneers, they would arrive upon their land, and this would initiate a certain uh, important event in their evolution that would be a split between two different paths. The upper path that you see with the individuals kind of holding hands up there, this is regarded as sort of the path of our modern civilization. You can see off to the right there, there's someone holding some sort of weapon, looks like maybe a bow or something like that. The lower path where you see those circles and the line continuing off to the right, this is the path of the Hopi, the path of the humble and simple ways of life. The Hopi predicted that these two paths would diverge from each other, but that the Hopi should watch for three important signs that the prophecy of their creation story was being fulfilled. The first circle off to the left is considered the first earth shaking event that would occur. This would closely be followed by a second earth shaking event, and there were certain signs and symbols that were given to the Hopi that would help them recognize the unfoldment of these events. Today, the Hopi are established that the first and second earth shaking events are the first and second world wars. And you can see in this rock carving, it's not as apparent, but underneath the or between the two lines, after the second circle, there is a line sort of connecting down between the upper path and the lower path. And this was the opportunity for our, let's say, our Western civilization to rejoin the Hopi in a humble and simple way of life. Around this time, there was another symbol off a little bit more to the right on the lower line, which indicates a third earth shaking event or world shaking event that the Hopi call the Day of Purification. You can see that at the top, if we continue down the path that we're on currently, that path of evolution begins dissipating and eventually ends. But if we are to rejoin the simple and humble way of life of the Hopi and continue, we will become essentially cultivators or gardeners of this world and cultivators and gardeners of our own inner spiritual landscape as well. So I want to leave you with that, but also I wanted to now jump to another creation myth And this is the creation myth of the Quiche Maya, a group of people who live in what is today Guatemala. Their creation story, the Popol Vuh, is one of the richest creation stories that we have record of. For the main reason that it was one of the few texts that was not burned upon the arrival of the Europeans. And in this story, there's a very interesting part at the beginning that discusses the creation of all life on this world. The creation of life was attended by two cosmic forces. The first they called the feathered serpent. The second they called the former and shaper. I would argue that these two forces, starting with the feathered serpent, represent the force of Kundalini, of evolution, the unfoldment of time, and the former and shaper, space or organic matter, life. These two forces then combine to create life on this world. Today, we're discussing Kundalini and how Kundalini unfolds within a human being. The other piece of this is how do we now handle or deal with this process of unfoldment on a human level? During this process of creation, there were two attempts that were made to create life in a balanced way. The first draft of creation was the creation of mud people who didn't have minds of their own, who were too soft, and so were then destroyed. A second attempt was then made to create people out of wood or sticks, and they were too hard and too bitter, and so they were again destroyed. And then the story goes on that humanity was then created in a more balanced way, and so the myth unfolds. So why am I introducing these two paths that we see both in the Hopi creation story and also in the creation story of the Quiche Maya? Well, it's pretty apparent when we look out on the world today, we see a world divided. Today, we see, especially here in the United States and elsewhere around the world, people divided into two separate groups that seem to be more and more divided every day. We see the left and the right. On the left, we see progressivism. And by the way, what I'm walking through here are not simply my judgment calls. These are actually from numerous psychological studies and surveys that have been done over the past decade or so. So on the left, we have progressivism. We see a value of egalitarianism and of sharing of resources. We also see questioning and overruling boundaries. We see less loyalty to group and authority, and also less organized and less orderly in their thinking and thought processes. On the right, we see more traditionalism. They value loyalty, authority, and maintaining social order. They also believe in receiving reward based on proportionate work or value that's added to the system. More accepting of inequality, and also more anxious or protectionist or fear driven in their decision making. Now, typically, if a person falls on either the left or the right, they'll look at the other side and begin demonizing them for whatever reasons. But the reason I've laid this out here today like this is because you can see that even from psychological studies that have been done during the past 10 years is that perhaps these are different sides of the same coin. Perhaps they're different sides of the human personality. And perhaps both are needed in the world to come. The the Indians have a very interesting model that they have where there are three cosmic forces always at work within the human mind. And these are the forces of Rajas, or activity, energy, passion, fire, heat. You have Tamas, which is ignorance or sloth, slowness, coolness. But in the middle of them, you have the force of Sattva, which is the middle way, the force of balance and harmoniousness. And I would argue that if we look at the political spectrum in a similar way, we find that these two forces are acting, but the ideal path for each one of us is not to be on one side or the other. It is to be right in the middle and to acknowledge the benefits of both of these ways of thinking. I think it's equally as important to look at the other side, understand why they believe, why they think the way that they do, and have more compassion and empathy. So, over the past few years, the Emerging Sciences Foundation has been conducting research into the phenomenon of spiritual awakening and Kundalini. And in our most recent round of research, we're now beginning to look at psychological, environmental, hereditary factors that might be important or responsible for spiritual awakening. We're just beginning to scratch the surface, but what does the research tell us? First, beliefs and behaviors matter. And this is, I think, a consistent theme that we've heard throughout this conference, throughout these presentations. First, love is a consistent theme, and we hear this over and over. Love is the force within us that is the human experience of unity, the human experience of consciousness, the human experience of oneness and wholeness. And I believe that love should be the driving force of our decision making, both on a personal level and also on a larger global and political level. Secondly, inner knowledge is ultimately more important than what we see in the media or what we consume by other means. If we're consuming a lot of, let's say, mental junk food, um, in that case in particular, we may want to then rely on gathering inner knowledge as our primary source of information. And by that, I mean really introspecting, finding the blocks within us that prevent us from a more expansive worldview, that prevent us from understanding the other. Also, I wanted to mention that the boundaries that we create between ourselves and other people, and by those I mean false boundaries or lines between us, um, these are boundaries that are also drawn between ourselves and God. So, what is our role in this process of global evolution? How can we help make this process easier? Well, I believe the solution is going to be our personal responsibility. This ultimately is the most important thing. Taking personal responsibility over not only our own life, but also taking personal responsibility of things on a global scale. So, a few do's and don'ts. First of all, don't be ideology driven. Understand that your ideology is the thing that is will always stand in the way between you and an objective, compassionate understanding of the world, whether your ideology is that of the left or the right or somewhere in between. I would also recommend to do not primarily identify with a group, community, culture, or nation. We should be identifying with the human family, or we can identify with the human family first and find where that leads us in terms of our compassionate decision making. We should also not hand personal responsibility away to others. We've heard from some great speakers today who have amazing ideas and have amazing work. But if each one of us walks away from this conference saying, well, these people are doing a lot to change the world, I guess I don't have to do anything now, we've handed our personal responsibility away. Instead, take responsibility for your own contribution to the evolution of the human species. I would also say that one of the most important ways to think about this is from the Iroquois. They have what they call the Great Law, which means to think 7 generations ahead in terms of our decision making. Rather than thinking about our own retirement, our own wages, our own living conditions, we should be thinking, are the decisions that I am making today, are the actions that I am taking benefiting 7 generations down the line? What will their lives look like? Because although that seems like a long ways away, it is very true that they are us and we are them. And it is in making decisions based on that law that we will then arrive at a more compassionate, more caring, more open, more respectful way of conducting ourselves and healing this world, bringing these two seemingly divergent ways of thinking of left and right together.